Hey, Jamie Edwards here again from jamieedwards.com. And today I want to talk to you about what do you do when you know that your software project is failing? If you're in a position where you're a project manager or a product manager or a lead over a project and you get assigned that the software project is failing, you may actually have some ability to influence the outcome if you're not hiding the result or the status of the project. But for software developers or engineers or ops people or support personnel, people who are responsible for the work, but maybe they're not at least looked at as people that have the ability to really change the direction of the project. I've been in that situation many times in my career, and often I ask myself, looking back at the many projects I've worked on, how could I have dealt with it better? And so today I want to just share with you a couple stories. As I've said before, I've been doing this for over 21 years and worked with a ton of different companies. But I like to try to kind of pick a couple different stories of companies that I've worked with and projects I've been on, hoping that those are going to bring out maybe some little nuggets that you can identify with. And maybe by sharing my story, it'll give you some ideas about how you might think about how you can deal with failing software projects and not let it stress you out so that you get into a situation where, maybe you're not sleeping well. I just talked about in my last video about how insomnia affected me last year. But, the reason I'm on this channel again is because I want to help people out there who are suffering in software projects. They're really frustrated. They're jaded. They're basically tuned out because they think things can't get better. So the first story I'll tell you is about a client that I worked with. This was probably about 5 or 6 years ago now. I was working for a consulting agency that I worked for a number of years. And this client came to us to have us build them a new product. And they were a company that was somewhat new to their market. And they were looking for somebody who had, expertise with the particular things that they wanted. And on this project, and you're going to hear this through the theme of this story, one of the things that I really learned, and amazingly, again, having done this for over 20 years, I think I was about 14 or 15 years in at this point. I'd been doing consulting for about 5 years. And I didn't really realize until this project how much the maturity of the client impacted whether a project was going to fail. So what do I mean by that? Well, if a company comes to you as a consulting firm or as a consultant, and they ask you to basically build a new product for them, one of the things that you have to figure out is how much software development has that client been involved with before? And in this case, this client had never really built a software product before. And so, if you're somebody out there who's developed software, you probably know that developing a software product has a lot of things about it that are very different from, building a building or, any kind of other typical engineering effort that make them a lot more risky, harder to estimate, just way more variables of things that can go wrong. And I don't think our company, myself included, I wasn't really in a leadership position. I was leading the software team, but I wasn't really leading the consulting engagement for that client. But we didn't really do as good of a job as I think we could have at really profiling and figuring out the maturity level of being involved in a software project that client was at when we started the project. And part of this, and I've talked about this in other videos of mine, is, just the nature of consulting. It's a business where you're trying to win work. If you're a consulting firm, which I worked for, you have employees that work for you, but you're not really making money off them unless they're out billing a client. And I think just the pressure of trying to make a sale and, the people who were kind of involved with that sales process, some of them actually left during that project kicking off, which tells you right there something kind of didn't go right. But we basically didn't really realize how immature that client was. And when I say immature, I don't want to come across like I'm saying that the people were immature people. That's not what I'm saying. It's really just that their expectations of how reliable a software development estimate and how projects would go were very different from what most people that I'm probably talking to on this channel would know as being true. So, one of the first kind of red flags that happened on this project for me was, I was asked to fly up to the East Coast and meet with this client and kind of get to know, some of their existing products that weren't software and try to understand a little bit more of what they were trying to build. And during that trip, I got to look at some sort of screen mock-ups. And, many of you who have built software before have been involved in this where, a client or a company will come to you, or maybe your product manager or your UX department, with a bunch of screen designs that they've done. And, just looking at the screen designs and then knowing, personally, I knew how much that client had basically went into a contract to build the project for us for. In other words, how much we were going to charge them to build this project. I knew kind of from the beginning, my gut told me without even doing any math, I'd been doing software at that point for 15 years. I was like, there's no way we're going to build this within that budget. I had this, again, red flag gut feeling, having done it for a long time. It just stuck out to me. And I immediately brought it up to the other consultant from my firm that was there. And unfortunately, he was involved in the sales process as well. And I think he was a good guy, and he was just trying to keep the project moving along. But he basically convinced me, hey, don't worry about it. We got a great relationship with this client. I know you're concerned and we all appreciate that, but just don't worry about it. And so, big red flag right there. And in hindsight's always 20/20. And looking back at it, I really should have spoken up louder. And I should have probably said to many more people, hey, I think the scope of this project is unrealistic. I think we're setting ourselves up for failure. I'd only really said that to one person, and I think that was a mistake on my part. So, a little bit of this video is also going to talk about, some things maybe that I could have done better. Again, hoping that maybe when you get into situations like this on your projects, whether you're an engineer or somebody working on a project, or you're a consultant, maybe you'll remember some of these stories and you can avoid some of these situations. So anyway, let's fast forward a little bit. We're getting ready to start the project, and I find out that I'm basically going to have 2 project managers over me, and both of them were just starting out in project management. Basically, they had not really managed software projects before, and this was supposed to be an Agile project. And I will say, at that time in my company's culture, I had done Agile software development before I even joined this consulting firm for probably 5 or 6 years in my career when I was doing product development. But my consulting agency was still kind of, there were pockets of people that knew Agile software development and what it meant. And we were going out there and we were trying to sell it because it was what our customers wanted. But really, culturally, the company, at least I believed, did not really understand Agile software development. And so these 2 project managers that they put over me, who were really only like 3 to 5 years into their career. And, I'm not one of these people that feels like, seniority is everything, but I did feel kind of uncomfortable. All right, I've started this project. My gut tells me there's no way we're going to get it done in time. And I've got these 2 project managers that have like a third of the years of experience as me at a company that hasn't really executed real well, in my opinion, on doing Agile. And they're going to lead this as an Agile project. So that was kind of like, I felt a little uncomfortable. But again, I was like, okay, let's see how this goes. So as the project was kicking off, one of the things that the client really wanted is they wanted to know a schedule. Okay. And they wanted to know exactly when were which features going to be released. Well, this was I don't remember the exact figure amount, but it was a little less than $500,000 project. That was what it was at least estimated for originally. And again, I have no idea where they came up with that number. I really don't, but I'll come back to that. That was someone came up with that during the sales process, and anytime I will tell you this, if you're a consultant and you have a sales organization and you have people that estimate the effort of a project to make a sale and they're not the same people who are going to deliver it, that's a huge red flag. You do not want to work on that project. I ever since that project happened, I would push back strongly and basically refuse to work on any projects where there was an estimate that was given to a client and it was based off somebody else's estimate. It just doesn't work, and a lot of this, if you're an experienced technologist out there, you're going to go, yeah, duh, Jamie, which I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. But so, one of the first things that client wanted is they wanted to know, how long was this going to take? And in my experience, I have done waterfall projects, in the past. Maybe the first 3 to 5 years of my career, it was mostly waterfall until we started really getting heavy into Agile around the, early 2000s, a couple years after the manifesto came out. And I was fairly good at estimating and coming up with that stuff, knowing that waterfall just doesn't work. But, again, oftentimes, especially if you have like a government contract or something like that, certain companies, certain agencies will not work with you unless you do, a big upfront estimate. And, with all the issues that I could get into about how it's just a horrible idea at the end of the day to win work. Unfortunately, some companies still bid this way. And I got to stop bumping my mic. So, what happened was we probably got about halfway, internally, our consulting agency, we started going through estimating all this stuff. And we got about halfway through, the screen mock-ups and the requirements and what the client had provided. And, that next week, the project was supposed to start. And I was kind of like, well, how are we going to start this project when we haven't even estimated everything? How are we going to start being held to a schedule? We just went through their requirements and their mock-ups and kind of came up with what we think they want. We haven't even gone back to them and gotten verification. Is this really what you want? And it was just very rushed and very like, we're going to try to act like everything's together. But I again, having already been doing this for about 15 years at that point, I was extremely uncomfortable, and I just felt like, wow, this is not a good sign. This is not a good way for this to start. So the project started, and very early, literally within the first week, I think there were some signs just in meeting with our client and kind of when we started building the initial first few features as in our first sprint, there were some disconnects between what we thought they wanted and, what they really wanted. And a lot of this went back to two things. One is we were in such a rush to meet the original expectations of what the salespeople said as far as the schedule and when we would start, that we compromised, anything that we knew. And especially, I felt like I really compromised what I knew to be the right way to do it. And, as soon as that started happening, I had a manager that I reported to, and he wasn't on the project, but I knew him really well, really great guy. And I started telling him, hey, I know you've got influence in the company, in our consulting agency. This project's going to be a disaster, basically, or we're already set up for big problems. And he luckily knew me well enough at that point, and he was like, oh my God, and started to talk to, some VPs and some other people that he knew, and started letting them know that I was really concerned about stuff. And I'm really thankful that he did that. Unfortunately, it went nowhere. Nobody wanted to take action on it. Nobody wanted to stop the project because it was like, well, we're only a week into it. We don't want to stop the project because it's going to look really bad to the client. And, this goes back to the theme of what this video is about, which is at that point, I really felt like, okay, I already knew the software project was going to fail. I already knew it. I'd been doing this long enough. All the other engineers who were under me, I was leading the engineering effort. They knew it was going to fail. We'd all talked about it. So at that point, there were a couple different ways I could have dealt with it. One was, I could have started to think about, okay, well, am I going to get blamed for this failure? If I am, now what can I do to make sure I don't get blamed? And, I thought about that and really earlier in my career, and I'll tell you some other stories that aren't as related to a project failure, but are related more to just like, accountability and things like that, where I kind of focused a lot on making sure I didn't take the fall for things. In this particular case, I really felt like I had to basically detach myself emotionally somewhat from the outcome of the project and kind of look at it like, look, I told them up front that I thought that the scope wasn't right and this was going to be too expensive and we weren't going to build it in time. I told them when I realized that, the way the project was set up and the way that we were starting, I thought we were rushing it. I had told everybody as much as I could, as clearly as I could, that it was going to be a problem, and nobody wanted to listen to me and nobody wanted to deal with it. So at that point, I only really had a couple options. I could obviously just leave the company. I also could just start to kind of, like I said, set myself up for blame shifting. And I really just decided at that point, the other engineers that were under me on that team, they were really worried. And so I decided, to support them, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to be as honest with them about the situation, let them know, my concerns, but then we're going to do the best job that we can. And that's all we did. I had raised my issue. I continued to raise my issue. Nobody wanted to take action on it. And at that point, I decided to stay. And so I just, I stayed on the project. And as the project began to fail, the company eventually even started threatening legal action against us, which was really stressful. And at the end of the day, what ended up happening was everybody else got pulled off the project but me. And I started to get, asked to do a whole bunch of ridiculous work, basically trying to do all the design up front to prove to them that what they were asking us to build was too expensive, which is what I had told them in the beginning. And I don't want this to sound like a big blame game for, me trashing the company that I worked for, because look, companies are people. No matter what people tell you about culture, whether you work at Google or a little small mom and pop shop, the people that you interact with at those companies make or break the experience you have there. And, I think everybody's heart was in the right place. Everybody at my company wanted to serve the client right. They weren't trying to deceive them. They were trying to give them, a fair deal. But I think at the end of the day, pride and the fear that people had at, if we lose this project because we tell people that we did something wrong or we have to change something, one of the biggest things I learned on that project was I will never hide the state of anything from a client or a manager or anybody like that. And I felt like I had gotten already pretty good at that in my career, but man, that project really sealed a deal for me where, the 5-6 years that followed after that project, I actually had to live this. I had to be very transparent with clients. And I think it really helped me. And I'm going to tell you in this next project how it helped me a lot. But, the project was ultimately a failure and we lost the client. And I don't know if we had to pay them back or how that all went down. But basically, they were really upset with us for a while. And that project also, some of the leadership on the client side were actually friends with some of our other clients. And so, it became a situation where some of our other clients started to distrust us because what they were hearing about from this other client. So it was really a bad situation. I mean, it was not good for anyone. I will say it was, from a technology standpoint, a really cool project. From confidentiality reasons, I can't really get into all the technology that was involved, but it combined hardware and software and some cloud stuff and encryption, a lot of really cool stuff from a technology standpoint, but also, the team that I worked with, everyone on that team had never worked with probably 60-70% of those technologies. And I mean, they all came up to speed on it within a week, super fast. The team was amazing. I mean, I worked with some UX people too from my consulting agency that I'd never worked with before, built some great relationships with them. They were fantastic. So here's a situation where you've got a winning team, everybody's heart is in the right place, but the project ultimately failed. And I just had to decide again, as this project was failing, I was just going to do the best job I could and hopefully, not get fired or, blamed. And if I was, well, I just looked at it like, it is what it is. So, ultimately I was not fired. There were some other outcomes. Basically, one of the things that happened, which was kind of ridiculous, was for a while, the company kind of had this, no Agile projects thing going, where it was like, if we sell work, we're not going to sell Agile work. And, I thought it was kind of a reactionary, ridiculous thing. But, again, I was not leading this company. This was a large, pretty large consulting company. And again, I think everybody's heart's in the right place. But, Just a lot of reaction, right? So the next story I'll tell you about is a client that I worked for very recently. And this client, I was asked to come in and basically help them deliver a solution that was several months late for their client. So, as a consultant, sometimes you're asked to come in and help a company deliver a project, and that company is another consulting company, or it's another vendor for somebody else. And so, this company I was asked to come in and help, their client was a huge, Fortune 50 company, big, powerful company with, thousands and thousands of employees, huge market share, big reputation on the line. And, so I was brought in to help this company, and this company that was trying to deliver the solution for the Fortune 50 company, well, they kind of couldn't figure out why their project was late. What was wrong? What was going on? It was really just that their management didn't have the technical capability to really look at what their team was doing and know, is my team really doing a good job? Are they capable of delivering this solution? Are they not doing a good job? Like, they brought me in, help us understand what's the true state of this project. Okay. So sure, I was like, I'm happy to come in and help with that. And, the other thing they talked with me about was, if we bring you in as well, it seems like we're having some trouble deploying, and it's taking a long time to get releases out, and we can't figure out why things seem to work in one environment and they don't in another. And it was, your classic case of they needed DevOps, they needed continuous delivery, right? And I won't split hairs about the difference between the two here. I've already done that on prior videos. I won't. Again, even though that's something I'm very passionate about, because I think, the industry is really hijacking DevOps, but that's a whole nother story. So, one thing that was really cool was, I was able to negotiate an amazing bill rate with this client. When I lost my job, last year in April, as I talked about in my prior video, one of the things I was most worried about was, man, I've been working for this consulting agency for 10 years. If I go out and try to win my own clients, am I going to be able to make enough? I got such a good bill rate. I literally in 2 months made the same amount of money that I would have made in 6 months in my prior job. So, going into consulting for yourself, if you've got the experience, it can be worth it. Now, I will tell you though, that project, this one I'm about to tell you on, was extremely stressful for me. And so that's probably part of the reason that I made such a great bill rate. Well, so they brought me in, and, the theme of this video being about what do you do when a project's, that a project's failing. So they brought me in. I already knew that the project was failing, at least from the standpoint that it was late. Okay. But I didn't really know, who are the players? What's the culture, really what's going on? So I got into this project, and really on the first day I met the main engineers on the project, and there were only a few of them, and they essentially hated each other. They would constantly blame each other. One of them, it's his fault, and the other one, it's his fault. And, their boss, the manager, if he ever asked one of them to do something, it was always, well, I'm not going to do that. That's what he does. No, I'm not going to do that. That's what he does. So there was a very obvious to me, kind of a behavior that was going on with these two gentlemen, where they were so scared because the project was late, and they so didn't want to be blamed that they basically had insulated themselves and drawn lines and said, like, anything outside of this little area that I feel comfortable in, I refuse to do any of that work. And so what that ended up doing was, this solution that this team was supposed to be building for this Fortune 50 company, they could never really reliably test the solution end to end, like all the components all together, because each of the engineers would only test their little piece in isolation. They didn't really have a sort of integration or end-to-end test. They did, but they had to basically do a live test, which this was a data project, a project that dealt with data. And so, running a real run of this project from end to end on a large true data set would take like 5 hours, and you can't, you know how software is. We can't wait 5 hours to find out if a change that we made is going to break the system or not. We just can't. So, when I got into this project, I realized these two gentlemen really hated each other. And, the thing I started to realize, and I really tried to keep in mind, because, from the get-go, they were very distrustful of me. They knew I was there, I think, as a consultant. I don't know if they knew what I was being paid or not. It really doesn't matter. But I think they just kind of looked at it like, we don't want this guy here, right? We don't want him here. And I talked about in one of my other videos about, should you be a software developer versus a software consultant? That one of the things that you have to accept if you're going to be a software consultant is people are not going to trust you when you first come in the door. Well, this was a perfect example of this. It wasn't just that they didn't trust me. I think they hated me. They feared me. They didn't want me to have anything to do with the project. So literally, like the first week of the project, I was just like trying not to get into a fight, but like basically battling with these two gentlemen to try to get permission to just do some work. I mean, they would kind of tell me a little of what was going on, but they were so busy and they were so stressed out and they were so angry that they barely had any time to really talk to me about what was really going on the project. So, as the project progressed, once I had figured out how toxic it was, I had to make a decision at that point, what was the best thing that I could do to try to meet the needs that the manager who was paying me had really brought me in for. In other words, I've got these two guys that hate each other. I got this project that's late. There's a ton of stress. What can I do with this failing project to help them? And really what I decided was, and there's a number of different things I could have decided, but what I decided was I'm going to actually try to just build a relationship with these two gentlemen and build some empathy with them so they trust me, and then hope that once they trust me, I can actually maybe heal their relationship a little bit. Because I really looked at it like, okay, first of all, I didn't have enough time or power, just me as one person, to like rewrite everything they'd done and kind of eliminate them from the picture. I mean, that would have been one option, right? That would have been a very elitist way to go about it. But I could have come in and I did look at the code and right away realized, tons of different things I maybe would have done differently. And I could have just, oh, this is all crap, and told their manager they don't know what they're doing. And hey, I can do it better and I'm going to rewrite everything. But, I'd been doing consulting at that point for a decade, and I knew like, okay, I actually can't just rewrite everything, even though I think, maybe architecturally they've made some mistakes here and there. Like, he doesn't have time. He's already, a number of months late, right? So really what I ended up doing for the next week or two was I just kind of let these guys, jab at me and give me crap and complain and swear and just bitch at me and, bitch at each other, and just kind of put up with it, and like I talked about in my last video, I had lost my job. So I needed the money, and this was a great bill rate. But, I stuck with it. And what ended up happening over some time was eventually, I kept saying, well, I think we need to do this. What do you guys think about this? And they'd be like, no way. And, anytime I tried to pitch improvements, it was kind of met with a lot of resistance. Well, it got to a point where they, trying to do it their way, had kind of failed in certain ways visibly to their manager enough times that their manager was kind of like, enough. You need to let Jamie go in there and at least try to do a part of it. So like one of the things that I was asked to do was to go in and actually just basically write some really sophisticated SQL queries. And, SQL is something I've been doing forever. I'm not a SQL master or anything like that, but I'm very competent with it. Been doing it a really long time. So, it's not the most thrilling work. I tend to like application programming languages more, or, scripting or DevOps type stuff, or, data science. But, I'm not one of these guys who's just like, I only want to do this. Don't ask me to do anything else. I'm a consultant, right? If I'm going to do a good job for my clients, I have to really do anything. So, I went in there and really this project was a reverse engineering effort. And so, one of the problems was really the estimates that were given to this Fortune 50 company never should have even been given to them in the first place, because it was really something you couldn't estimate. It was a reverse engineering project. But, that aside, it took me like 3 weeks, but I finally got to the point that I was able to produce a couple of these deliverables that, looked and had the right data and were exactly what this Fortune 50 company needed. And so at that point they saw, okay, this is possible, the whole way along, I was kind of trying to tell my client, I think you need to be a little more honest with your client, this Fortune 50, that, when we've went in here and looked at the project, we've kind of realized that, there's a lot of work left to do. And I think, it was one of those situations where, my client needed the work and, they weren't trying to lie to their client, but they also didn't want to lose their project. And, you guys, if you've been working in this industry for a while, you know that when some of these, contract disputes and one vendor working for another situations happen, people behave really illogically sometimes because there's a lot of fear involved. And so, I had to basically develop a mindset on this project that I'm getting paid a good bill rate, but I'm not doing the work that I'd really like to. I've got these guys that are berating me and just, yelling at me and not treating me very well. But I understand they're in a ton of stress and they wouldn't normally be acting this way, and I try to have some empathy for them and just decided I'm going to do this project, for as long as I can to help them as much as I can, even if the project fails, and, make the money I can from it. And I'm going to be honest with my client as much as I can. And I was, I told my client some things that I know the client did not want to hear about his project and about his involvement in it. And to be fair, he was really mature about it. I was really thankful that even though there was a lot of stress he was under, and I know sometimes he probably didn't want to hear what I told him, I think he appreciated it. And I appreciated it too. So, I will say from a relationship standpoint, I really felt like I did the best job I could trying to manage that relationship. So, ultimately at the end of the day, it got to a point where, the manager, my client, didn't need me anymore. I had gotten them sort of over the hump and to the point that he knew he'd be able to be successful from then on. And he was just kind of like, okay, well, I think we're pretty much done at this point. And so, I would have liked to have done the project maybe a little bit longer because I wouldn't have had to go out and get a new project. But at that point, I was really happy because, I made, again, really good money, made like 6 months worth of salary in 2 months on that contract. It was excellent financially for me. But, I also just, it was very stressful. I mean, having to deal with those gentlemen before they kind of started to chill out and trust me a little bit more. Was really frustrating, and I mean, I had a few days, it was mostly remote work where I was just sitting there, banging my head against the computer, trying to get a hold of these guys and trying to get into certain systems and them not having time or not wanting to deal with me. But, at the end of the day, I was proud of what I did. I actually really did help this client, I think, see that what they needed to do was possible. I think I helped this manager realize maybe where some of the holes were in his project. And, I don't even know, I want to give him a call sometime, but, how the project ultimately went. Did he get an extension with his client? But, the reason I wanted to bring up this project was because, one of the things that I used to do earlier in my career, especially like the first 10 years, was at the first sign of something going wrong, I would get really pissed off and I would get upset and I would start to blame other people and I'd blame technology and I'd blame decisions and I'd start to try to cover my butt, And I think if you want to be healthier about how you develop software, you need to realize that humans always being involved in software development, people are going to behave illogically. It doesn't matter how great of an agile process there is. It doesn't matter how awesome the architecture is, how much money you're making, how great the leadership is. You're going to get into situations where your project is ultimately going to fail and you're going to see that. And, I guess I would just encourage you, I don't think it's healthy for us to blame everybody else and kind of spew this toxic, well, it's your fault and that's screwed up and that's screwed up. Because all we end up doing at that point is we take that anger kind of inside and we take it home and we hold that in when we're around our family. At least I did. And, my wife, I love her. She's amazing. I mean, she's got her own issues like everybody does, but man, she has put up with, me being in this industry for 20 something years and all the change I've went through. And, I think one of the things she really helped me understand, she's much more kind of free spirited and open minded than I am. I'm a lot more, logical, structured, typical kind of software developer person. At least that's who I've become, through doing this for so many years. I'm trying to undo some of that, but she really helped me think about a lot of this work in a way as I progressed in my career and start to think of, what does it really matter if the project fails? What does it really matter if they blame you? What does it really matter if you lose your job? Do the best job you can, and whatever happens, happens. And it doesn't help for you to just walk around stressed out, holding in all these possibilities of what could be going wrong. And that's, you may have heard of it, called catastrophizing, right? It's you think of the worst case scenario and you actually have the feelings like it's happening and it hasn't even happened yet. So, that's really just what I wanted to talk to you about today. Again, like I talked about in my video yesterday, I'm going to try to do these more kind of informal, sort of rambling videos. But if you like this video, will you please share it with others if you think it would help them? And, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube. Like my page if you're on Facebook. And if you're on SoundCloud, follow me as well for updates every time I post a new podcast. So until next time, thanks.